Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Mitchell. I am the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships President and CEO. Today's webinar is the latest in our Infrastructure Innovators series. These free events welcome all stakeholders from the infrastructure sector and beyond to learn about new opportunities, innovations, ideas, and technologies that have the potential to transform the infrastructure sector. Just a quick housekeeping note, we'll be taking questions at the end of the event, so do feel free to submit them anytime using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now, without further ado, let me introduce you to our speaker, Kris Lengieza. Kris is the Global Technology Evangelist at Procore Technologies and brings a wealth of experience and passion to the intersection of construction and technology. Previously serving as the VP of Global Partnerships and Alliances, Kris oversaw a diverse ecosystem spanning channel, ISV, public, and association partnerships. His recognition as one of the top 40 construction professionals under 40 by ENR and BDNC underscores his impact in the industry. Kris's journey began 15 years ago working in the construction field, where he embraced technology as an early adopter and strived to seamlessly integrate data across all construction solutions. As a futurist and construction tech evangelist, Kris now collaborates extensively with industry innovators, tech organizations, and construction companies. He has played a pivotal role in Procore's product strategy, delivering industry and technology insights to improve how Procore solutions can serve the industry. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kris. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Appreciate you all having me today. I'm really excited to dive into today's topic. I also need to update my bio because it's been a little bit over 20 years now that I've been in this industry, and just really love the opportunity to chat with the industry about ways that we can overcome many of the challenges that we are faced with as a construction industry. There is no shortage of things that get thrown at us on any given day, whether it's on a project, whether it's what's happening in the industry. And, somehow, some way, we always seem to find a way to make it work. So I'm going to share my screen right here. I'm just going to give it a second, make sure that everything kind of comes up okay. Pause there. Hopefully everybody's seeing that. If not, please throw something in the chat and we will make sure that we're getting that showing today. But what we're really here to talk about today is strategic risk and cost control, right? How do we navigate one of those challenges that are being thrown at us right now in our industry, which is the volatility that is happening in the construction space in Canada? And as I mentioned, I'm Kris Lengieza. I'm going to be your host today on this journey, and we're really going to dive into what is impacting Canada's most vital parts of the economy, which is the construction industry. And I'm not telling you anything you probably don't already know, but the construction industry in Canada employs over 1.6 million Canadians and contributes a significant piece to the gross domestic product of about 7.5%. But it is literally a sector that is the foundation of a lot of the economy and the society in Canada. So no matter how we think about how strong it is, it's also faced by some significant volatility and unprecedented volatility than we may have ever seen before. So today on the webinar, we're going to delve into the forces that are reshaping that landscape. And more importantly, let's explore how we can collectively build some more resilience in this dynamic market. So let me set the stage here a little bit. We talked about how Canada's construction sector is really vital. It's a vital economic pillar, not just for the GDP, but for employment and for what infrastructure we are actually building in the country. And we're seeing intense activity nationwide, really some booming commercial developments and major infrastructure projects. But despite the robust demand, which is going to lead to the construction spend being close to $571 billion by 2033, there's a lot of uncertainty and delays that are continuing to impact these projects. And we've seen some stabilization at the end of 2024 and into early 2025, but a lot of the underlying pressures persist, demanding that we have a little bit more strategic foresight and be a little bit more adaptive in our approaches. So the purpose of today's presentation is really clear. We're going to deconstruct some of the root causes of this unpredictability, analyze the implications and what it's going to mean for the infrastructure space and for construction in Canada. And then we're going to present a suite of really actionable strategies for helping to mitigate and adapt to what's happening around us. Our overarching goal is really that you feel empowered. You, as leaders, will have the knowledge and the tools necessary to make informed decisions and really safeguard project successes and foster a more enduring and more resilient sector. Um, and this is really meant to like be a conversation. So please drop your questions into the chat. We will get to those at the end. And if I see something that I can address as I'm speaking through these things, I absolutely will. So let's jump into really some of these drivers of the market volatility. The current unpredictability in our market really doesn't stem from one single source, but rather this confluence, this interconnected set of factors. And understanding each of these drivers is absolutely essential for developing a truly effective mitigation and adaptation strategy. So over the next few slides, I'm going to systematically deconstruct some of these key drivers that are influencing the market today. We'll talk about things like economic and financial pressures, geopolitical and trade uncertainties, the evolving supply chain landscape, persistent labor market challenges, and of course, things like technology and regulatory and policy influences. And each one of these things will play a critical role in really understanding where the volatility we're experiencing is coming from, and then, of course, how to try and mitigate that. So let's jump into our first one, which is really around economic and financial pressures. While the Canadian Consumer Price Index has shown some gradual cooling, right, core inflation remains somewhat persistent. And these components directly and heavily impact construction costs. We're seeing construction wages rise faster than the overall economy, and with average hourly rates exceeding $37 in some parts of Canada, it's really contributing to the elevated project costs. Now, the industry is also still contending with the lagged effects of some previous interest rate hikes. While these earlier increases significantly impacted construction sector, leading to some job losses, some project delays, or even cancellations, particularly in residential, projects that were initially approved at a lower interest may still be facing some substantial funding challenges to get back to the market. Now, the good news is, though, we're seeing some positive tailwinds there. The Bank of Canada started cutting these rates towards the end of last year and is continuing to signal that there'll be further reductions in those interest rates. And that's starting to loosen some of the monetary policy and beginning to really stimulate some of the investment in the market. Now, that stimulated investment is particularly evident in multifamily residential and crucial house-enabling infrastructure projects. This indicates that the sensitivity or in recovery across subsectors is really, it really is sector by sector. And oftentimes these government-backed or structured P3s may be a more insulated and even more stimulated portion of the market that we're moving forward towards. So let's also talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening geopolitically and a lot of the trade uncertainties. And I think the only certainty in this space, because it's pretty much a wild card, is that there's a lot of uncertainty. And particularly with the trade tensions that are happening between the US and Canada, and it is leading to a substantial amount of unpredictability. The ongoing threats of tariffs and whether or not they're on, they're off, when they're going to reoccur, whether they're going to go up, whether they're going to go down, is just causing a lot of uncertainty, and it continues to be a wild card. And this is undermining some of the current cost stabilization that we're seeing across the market. Now, Canada's construction sector is notably reliant on a lot of imports for critical inputs such as steel, aluminum, with nearly 30% of the construction materials sourced from the US. Now, these tariffs will disproportionately continue to impact that cost unless there is a mechanism for us to mitigate some of these challenges. And so it's going to directly affect project feasibility and budgets as we move forward. Now, we're also dealing with some compounding factors around currency volatility. The threat of these trades is measured has already influenced the value of the Canadian dollar going up and down, and that's making it hard to predict on project costs, right? It's also making it hard for us to, predict the cost of imported materials, equipment, technology. It's just adding another layer of financial risk on projects that are already strained from a price perspective. So, because of all of this, there's really this desire, and that it's compelling Canadian leaders to really fundamentally rethink their global sourcing strategy. This is not just a cost adder; it introduces systematic risk for us today by being so dependent on so many materials that are coming from other places. And so it necessitates this strategic pivot from purely like cost-driven decision making around procurement to a more comprehensive approach that emphasizes supply chain sovereignty, including reshoring and nearshoring initiatives. And even some of these strategies entail potentially higher upfront costs, but much more long-term stability. Now, if we dive a little bit deeper into that supply chain, we also start to realize that we're still dealing with some of the post-pandemic realities. The global supply chain landscape, it's continuing to evolve, presenting both lingering disruptions and also new opportunities. Construction costs remain elevated on a lot of materials, which is a lingering effect of many of the supply disruptions that happened during the pandemic. Now, our industry's inherent dependence on a wide variety of materials really means that we are very susceptible to global trade dynamics. And these global disruptions have really prompted a significant reevaluation of those sourcing strategies. We're seeing this growing trend towards reshoring production back to Canada, nearshoring to other nearby companies, and this is explicitly aimed at mitigating the risks associated with many of these geopolitical tensions, natural disasters, and a lot of things that are happening in transportation today that many times fall outside of our control. And this strategic shift is complemented by an increasing focus on fostering collaboration with local suppliers, diversifying supply chains across multiple suppliers locally and internationally. And really, these approaches are crucial for building stability and then the necessary resilience in our supply chain and our supply network. That the concept that I mentioned before of that supply chain sovereignty is gaining a lot of prominence, moving beyond just simply mitigating disruptions to advocating for independent control over our own supply chain. And this involves prioritizing domestic production, fostering a lot more localized partnerships, and making strategic investments in the national infrastructure. This represents a national strategic shift where supply chain management is no longer just an operational concern, but a critical component of the national economy and even the security around the economy. Now, I think we all talk about the challenges or the persistent challenges around labor in the construction market as well. A critical driving factor to that volatility is this profound and persistent skilled labor shortage. The industry faces widespread job vacancies, with statistics in Canada reporting national job vacancy, down to about 2.9%, which is down from 4.2 in early 2024. But it's still a problem because more people are actually leaving the industry than are coming into it, and that's because of this large retirement cliff. Nearly 1 in 5 construction workers is projected to retire within the next decade. Ontario alone anticipates over 80,000 retirements by 2031, which highlights really the scale of really the knowledge and labor gap that is necessary. It's not just about having the people, but the really truly skilled people and their experience that is leaving the industry with them. So despite a lot of high demand, the supply of qualified workers consistently just can't keep pace with what we need. And because of this, the direct consequences of these shortages is significant upward pressure on project costs. The scarcity of these skilled workers contributes to higher labor costs and notably like sometimes a lack of even competition on projects because we don't have enough workers for everyone to have the people that they need to go after many of these projects. And that leads to higher construction expenses. Contractors are frequently forced to decline projects because they don't have enough people or absorb some of the rising costs due to insufficient staffing. So the severe nature of this shortage compels companies to really adopt automation and augmentation of the workforce and leverage technology not just to drive efficiency, but as a necessity for the existing workforce, as a recruiting tool for the incoming workforce, and as a way for them to meet the needs of the projects that we have across the country. And it's really starting to redefine the skills profile of an ideal worker, creating growing demand for tradespeople who are proficient in digital tools, that might be familiar with drones or robotics, right? That understand how to look at data and to make decisions. And the labor course crisis is really therefore accelerating in some ways the digital transformation that's happening in our industry. Now, when we start to take a look at how regulatory and policy is influencing the industry as one of those variable factors, we really talk about how regulations and policies play a dual role. Things like evolving building codes, particularly those that are focused on energy efficiency and really enhanced building performance, they're contributing to an increased construction cost. Canada has a very ambitious commitment to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050, which also puts a lot of supply on the supply chain, really to adopt greener practices, to have more availability of green materials. And while it's really crucial for the sustainability of the economy, but also the environment, it means that in the short term, there's cost pressure here. Now, conversely, it can also be a strategic enabler. Government investments remain a significant driver of construction activity. So, growth in manufacturing, transportation, broader infrastructure projects continue to stimulate a lot of demand in the construction industry. And the Canadian government, through initiatives like the P3 Canada Fund, are actively supporting and promoting P3 projects, leveraging the private sector's expertise and capital to do even more of these projects. So the government is actually, in their policy, are acting both as a driver of demand and an also key shaper of how we procure and manage major infrastructure initiatives. And it's that dichotomy where policy both creates challenges and offers a lot of opportunity and solutions for us as well. And so we must really take a step back as leaders and adopt a really nuanced approach to policy engagement, right? Actively participating in discussions to shape regulations that strike that balance between sustainability goals, economic viability, and demand and the needs of the country. Concurrently, we must strategically leverage, available government programs and funding to de-risk projects wherever we can and stimulate more investment. Then the last piece is really what's happening around technology in our space. And I oftentimes love to use this quote that is, once a new technology rolls over you, if you're not on part of it, then you're part of the road, right? And the reality of that is like the technology is going to come rolling down the road. You have to choose on whether or not you want to roll with it or you want to get run over by it. And this is really important because in the last year, I've seen more evolution and more innovation happen in the construction space just due to the technology advancements that are happening outside of construction that I may have seen in the last 10 years of really focusing on technology in this space. And to me, as someone who has long known that technology is an enabler for our businesses, I get really excited because I think we're starting to see some of the investments that have been made really start to actually pay off, actually make jobs easier, actually drive productivity. We're starting to see some of the things that people have talked about for a long time become viable. The AI is not necessarily new to the construction industry or new in general, But the way that we're using it is very different than we ever have before. It's much more conversational. It's much more approachable. It's something that anyone who can have a conversation with a human can actually start to interact with AI. You don't need any special skills. The skills you need to learn are, hey, what tools are out there and how do I ask really great questions of it? Similarly, if you had asked me 2 to 3 years ago my thoughts on robotics in construction, I probably would have told you, yeah, I'm not that bullish. But the advancements that have happened and the speed at which they are happening, and also the introduction is what I would like to say is robots as tools, where they are not there to take over the whole job. They are there to make the worker more efficient, make them more productive, and it still requires the worker's expertise to drive it, but they're able to just actually do the job with maybe a little less backbreaking work, or they're able to do multiple things at the same time so that they can focus their time and energy on the higher value tasks. And great examples of this are our layout with robotic based layout. It's not that it's that much faster, even though it is. It's the fact that you can put a lot more information out than you ever could before. Things that you never would have thought about marking on the floor now just happen as part of the process. Similarly, I think of robots as tool. I was just talking to a startup that's focusing on wire pulling and being able to pull wires through conduit, and how they can do that at a significantly higher rate than just having, apprentices work on pulling that wire manually, which now allows them to go and do more high value activities like actually landing wire in a panel, making up junction boxes, all the things that need to build out the system. So the technology is coming and we are evolving very, very quickly, but we have to get on board and we have to deal with a lot of the change management that goes along with it. So let's jump into a little bit more about like what are some of the strategies? Like what can we actually do here to actually start to mitigate and adapt to the volatility that we're seeing? Well, it's not just one thing. It really does require a truly multifaceted approach. There's not one single silver bullet, but rather it takes an integration of various elements. And in this section, we're going to really outline some of those strategic imperatives, focusing on how we can build more resilience. The volatility is always going to be there, folks. Been in this industry for almost 25 years. There's always something causing volatility, whether it's a global pandemic, whether it's trade tariffs, whether it's the Panama Canal not being able to get materials, whether it's the labor shortage. There's always going to be something that's driving volatility. And the real question is, and this is why people, in my opinion, this is one of the greatest industries, because we always find a way to manage that volatility, right? And so we can be more proactive. We can really start to develop robust supply chain strategies, be more proactive in our workforce development, and really embrace a lot of the technology that's now becoming available and a lot of the innovation that's happened to mitigate some of this volatility. And each of these pillars is essential, and we need to focus on each one of them. So let's start off by talking about like contractual and financial strategies, right? In a volatile market, traditional fixed price contracts are just not going to suffice anymore. In order to account for a lot of the unpredictable material costs, contracts need to more explicitly provide provisions such as cash allowances and change directives, as seen in CCDC docs. And it's also critical to negotiate material pricing adjustments clauses that allow for more flexibility based on what's happening in the market currently. We also have to think about things like beyond pricing. Contracts must provide reasonable relief for project delays or cost impacts that are caused by unforeseen events, things that we may not have even thought of or ever experienced before, such as trade disruptions or pandemics. The good thing is P3 project agreements in particular are really designed with significantly more detailed opportunities for these type of event types, and really change in law provisions compared to standard contracts than we are used to seeing. And so this is really vital to more equitable risk sharing. Now, as we talk about the P3 model, fundamentally, it's really designed to transfer a major share of project risk to the private sector. However, for exceptionally complex projects and during a lot of volatility, which is what we're experiencing now, some more nuanced approach to risk allocation is probably necessary. This may involve more public and private partnerships sharing certain risks. We've seen some examples of this, recognizing that all risks can't be efficiently priced or solely borne by just one party or just pushed down the supply chain. And the research really does highlight the explicit need for specific contractual mechanisms like price escalations and force majeure clauses. And this underscores that standard fixed price contracts are just insufficient to deliver the type of scale that we need to build today and during our current environment. And so we must really look to adopt and drive more dynamic and flexible frameworks, moving away from risk dumping down the chain to more of a shared responsibility and more one where we are solving these challenges together instead of just pushing them down the supply chain. Now, we talked about supply chain quite a bit and really this idea of, enhancing the supply chain sovereignty and resilience. And building resilience in the face of supply chain disruptions really requires more strategic reevaluation. We need to reduce the reliance on distant suppliers through strategies like reshoring production back to Canada and nearshoring to nearby countries. It's just going to be more and more crucial for us to mitigate a lot of the risks from geopolitical tensions, those natural disasters or unexpected transportation delays. And this concurrently allows us to really foster strategic domestic partnerships that ensure a more stable and predictable flow of really the essential materials and components that are available, thereby reducing a lot of dependency on what can be volatile international markets. These approaches are fundamental to building that resiliency and that inherent robustness that is necessary to deliver the scale that we are looking to deliver in Canada. Now, we also need to think about how we can leverage data, right? And more advanced analytics and the opportunity to really garner critical insights into the supply chain and the supply chain operations that we might not be getting today. And that'll allow us to have more visibility and better track shipment delays, identify potential bottlenecks before they can even escalate. And that's going to require that we share a lot more data than we ever have in the past, and that we really are able to put our fingers on things in much more real time. This, in conjunction with the adoption of AI-driven solutions, really can further enhance the decision-making capabilities that we need in order to really make decisions on where to get our materials from, how to leverage them best, what suppliers actually have the inventory we need, and potentially even the transportation delays that may be thwarted by using a more local supplier or a different supplier that might have the lowest cost. And that allows us just to be a lot more proactive in our prediction of either the disruptions or in how we plan for the supply chain and the shifts of how we're going to manage it from a very reactive perspective to much more predictive and if I will say forecasted, if you will. It also highlights that there's a significant shift towards this idea that we want to have more supply chain sovereignty, which really does, as I said, prioritizes less reliance on more global markets and more focus on the local markets. And this is good for construction in a lot of different ways, not just from, hey, we will have more predictability in our supply chain, but there'll be a lot of manufacturing that will have to come along with this, which means that there's more things for us to build in order to even support the things that we want to go build. And so it does require a bit of a shift in looking at things not just purely from a cost optimization perspective, but a more holistic risk optimization approach than just, hey, who has the cheapest product? Now, when we talk about really mitigating a lot of the labor challenges we have, it really does come back to development of the workforce and retention of the workforce. And it's not a short-term solution. If we're going to address the persistent labor challenges and make sure that we really do have the skilled workforce that we need, it's going to take a critical long-term view, right? And it's going to require us to significantly ramp up training programs, increase apprenticeship slots, expand trade programs, and really cultivate that robust domestic talent pipeline. And that talent pipeline is not going to just be who we've always seen. It's going to require new skills, new training, new initiatives to make sure that they are ready to work in the construction industry for the next 30 to 40 years. There's also some more immediate potential relief from both the short term and medium term labor needs, and that is strategic immigration policies, and they can be crucial to how we can actually bring more labor and talent into the industry. Policies that'll facilitate that immigration of skilled tradespeople to Canada and streamline the recognition of their foreign credentials is really vital for filling some of the gaps we have right now, and allows us to bring in really globally qualified professionals that we can quickly integrate into this industry. But once they're here, we got to keep them here, right? And it's not just purely about having really great wages, because that everybody thinks that's a silver bullet, but it's really about how do we comprehensively retain these employees. A lot of people will actually come into our industry and then unfortunately leave pretty quickly because that's not what they thought it would be. So we have to make sure we provide great wages, but also great benefits. But we also have to make sure we're providing a really safe work environment. We're providing really clear career pathways for them. And we have amazing cultures inside of our businesses. I had the fortune of working for three really great contractors during my contracting part of my career. And, each one of them I spent about 7 years at. So I stayed there because the culture of the company was fantastic. I loved the people I worked with. I knew that I had opportunity for growth. And that allowed me to really like kind of stay with a company for longer and contribute in ways that I didn't even know were possible when I first started there. So we can do that by investing in more mentorship programs, maybe even finding some more flexible working arrangement opportunities. And today's generation who's coming into the industry, they've all grown up on scoreboards. If you have any kids, especially if they're in that like 12 to like 18, then you probably know that they game everything. Everything is a scoreboard for them. And so they love the idea of more performance-based incentives, and that can really significantly boost satisfaction and loyalty, and also recognize that we're going to reward those who are performing the best. And I think the last piece here is we have to invest in the skills necessary to be in this industry for the future. Um, you know, because we are still at such a shortage of labor, we are going to need to leverage technologies and have people that are willing to adopt automation, willing to adopt robotics, willing to adopt AI, and these new technology shifts that are really about augmenting them, not replacing them, but more allowing them to spend time on the things that they actually want to do instead of just stamping another submittal. And so we'll have to look sometimes outside of our industry or where we have traditionally looked for new skills profiles for tradespeople and for those that are working inside of our businesses. And understanding that when we interview folks that they have to be okay with change. They have to be okay with digital tools, and that they're willing to learn new skill sets as we move through this industry. And if we talk about some of those digital tools and some of the things that we need to really embrace, we have recently put out a report around what we believe the future of construction looks like over the next 5 to 8 years. And candidly, some of it's coming faster than some on that timeline. But it really is leaning into this idea that we have to improve our productivity. And that productivity is going to be driven by automation and augmentation. And that's going to show up in the form of robotics. That's going to show up in the form of AI. That's going to show up in the form of agents that are going to just do things for us. And we have to lean into them. We also understand that, like the workforce of the future, we've got to capture the knowledge from the workforce we have today to even be able to onboard that workforce in the future. And so, in a future world, like I should be able to tap into the expertise and the knowledge of anyone that's ever worked for me or worked with me because I've captured that knowledge, or I can bring them remotely to a job site and help me solve a problem without them physically being there. And then I talked a little bit about this before around AI and data and our investment of really changing the way that we make decisions. The construction industry has relied so heavily for so long on just our gut feelings. And that's how we've made decisions. But we have a lot of data. Unfortunately, about 96% of that data goes unused. And all of you as leaders have told us that you could make better decisions if you had data more in real time and it was more accessible to you. I think the number is about 80% say that they could make better decisions if they had that. And so we need to shift our mindset of thinking about data as like a silent partner for you. Data has a seat at the table, whether it's what materials we're going to procure, what contractor we're going to go hire, which potential schedule sequencing we're going to use. Let's use the data to help us drive more informed decisions. And because of things like AI and the ability for us to make that more approachable than we ever have before. If you've ever used ChatGPT, it's pretty easy. You can ask it any question. You don't have to have a coding degree in order to use AI anymore. And I think that's going to be a big shift for us in the future. And I think the last piece is we have to think about how we change the way that we design moving forward. If you're a builder and you're in this room, you have a tremendous amount of knowledge and data and know-how around what works on projects. And that suits you very, very well to be a bigger part of that design process. And I think we're going to see things automate here. We're going to see design become more and more automated, but it'll be powered by the knowledge and data that has been collected for years by contractors on a job site. And so I think we're going to see this shift that there'll be even more integration of the contractor into the design process, and they may even be driving it more into the future. So what does this really mean for us? Well, I said it at the beginning. I obviously clearly love the construction industry. I think we are one of the most resilient, one of the most innovative industries out there that we don't get the credit for how great at problem solving we really are. And we overcome challenges every day on a job site, but we've overcome pretty much every challenge that's been thrown at us in the history of the world, right? But we have to be strategic in how we do that. And so if we really want to navigate this landscape, we have to be more proactive in the risk management. We've got to implement those robust, forward-looking risk assessment frameworks that leverage data, that leverage technology, that allow us to simulate and predict and anticipate disruptions. And we got to move beyond the reactive problem solving to more predictive capabilities, enabling us to just be more informed and more forecasted around what's happening around us. Secondly, we've got to foster deeper and more integrated collaboration across the entire ecosystem. This includes strengthening relationships between public and private sectors, supply chains, and many various industry players. And I think if we really lean into and embrace the progressive P3 models of collaborative contracting and those frameworks, and we can really share the risk, we can co-innovate on solutions in this space. We also have to be champions for widespread adoption of innovation, whether it's technology like AI, BIM, digital twins, automation. They're just tools for us, not just for efficiency, but really for enhancing productivity, safety, and helping us to solve a lot of the workforce challenges that we have today. So we need to invest strategically in research and development to find ways to leverage this innovation to move us forward. We, of course, have to invest in our workforce. And we've got to prioritize the long-term investment by significantly expanding what we're doing from a training perspective, what we're doing from an apprenticeship perspective. And we can actively advocate to leverage policy to bring more people to the country to work in our industry. That will allow us to give ourselves some short-term relief to many of these labor challenges. And if we can really cultivate positive, inclusive, forward-thinking cultures in our businesses, this will help keep the talent in the industry and allow them to help build the next generation of builders. We talked a lot about how strategic the supply chain is and that building that resilience is, we really need to reevaluate our current supply chain scenario, and prioritize diversifying our sourcing. Really explore where we can get things locally, where it makes more logistical sense from a feasibility standpoint, and just build that strong domestic partnership to build a lot of the resilience into the system that will help us mitigate the potential geopolitical, economic, transportation shocks that may get introduced into the system. And we can't be so focused only on the cost-driven aspects of our supply chain. We've got to balance that out with predictability and security. And finally, we need to really actively engage with government and policymakers at all levels to shape the future of our industry, to really focus on that resilience and then the future growth. And this includes advocating for, a lot of trade barriers, also a lot of the regulatory frameworks, and making sure that they work for us and they're aligned with market realities, promoting long-term goals that we have for infrastructure that'll benefit the entire sector, the economy, and just the country as a whole. So there's a lot of opportunity here. We have this shared responsibility. And the only way that we're going to really be able to handle the current market volatility is by sharing that responsibility. And it requires us to take action. It requires us to be more strategic. And it's going to take all of us to really be able to mitigate some of the volatility we're experiencing right now. And we have a lot of encouraging things that are happening. Despite all these changes, there's more investment in infrastructure right now than there has been, right? And so that's really encouraging. And, the robust pipeline that's being driven by a lot of these fundamental factors and even some of this volatility is actually a huge tailwind for us. And so we can meet the goals that we have around housing, around sustainability. And, there's a lot there for us to be excited about. So, with all of this, if we can be proactive and we can be adaptable, as we always have been as an industry, we can collaborate and we can really champion innovation and continuous improvement. We are uniquely positioned to not only weather the storm that's around us right now, but also build a stronger, more sustainable, and inherently more resilient market. And these pivots, they'll ensure that Canada continues to deliver the high quality infrastructure that is necessary for the economic growth of the country, as well as the societal well-being. With that, I do have a few other things to share with you as well. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about some of those things I was talking about around the future and where technology is heading and how it's evolving our industry, please feel free to download our report on that. We also have a podcast which I host with my co-host Sasha Reed. We've got some great Canadian guests that are coming on this season as well, talking about the future of our industry, talking about the future of construction. And if you enjoyed this content, or you want to learn more about Procore, we do have our annual user conference that's happening in October in Houston. We'd love to see as many of you there as possible. So with that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time and your attention. And I think we're going to take some questions.
Thanks so much, Kris. And yeah, just a reminder to folks, any questions you have, please don't hesitate to plug them into the Q&A chat, and I'll be happy to sort of hand them over to Kris for response. It's fascinating space. I think, very topical, Kris, all the things that you've sort of highlighted. I think, if I could start with a question of my own, there's a lot to think about. And I think, the industry has been, um, a lot of what you've highlighted has been top of mind for quite some time. And, we at the council do quite a bit of work on sort of, adapting and evolving the model and, working on that collaboration and advocacy. And, there's, partnerships we have in terms of the labor mobility and the innovation and, all of those pieces. And now we're being catapulted into a spot where infrastructure isn't what underpins the national narrative. It is the national narrative. So, build, baby, build, and the nation building projects on top of, the provincial pipelines of projects and the municipal needs and all of that. So, one of the things you said, like, in all of this was talking about advocacy. So, where do you think,
Mhm.
like, where would you start? Like, if you were to talk to a government official, what would be top of mind, or do you think that they're all equal weighting? Do you think we kind of have to chip away at them one by one, or do you think we can tackle all the issues all at once? That's a loaded question, I know, because we're doing some of this internal thinking as well. So I put you on the
Yeah.
spot a little bit, but I wouldn't mind sort of hearing your views on, where does the industry begin?
Yeah, listen, if I've learned anything in the last 7 years of being at Procore, is that focus can be really important. It's hard to do everything all at once for everybody, right? And so while all of these individual pieces are really, really important, there's probably a need to focus on one or two that I think are at the forefront to then give us some breathing room to go and kind of focus on the others. I think labor, I know we talk about labor all the time. We talk about labor in this industry intensely. I think it's probably the number one thing that we can focus on. And I sometimes wonder if we don't get a little too broad with it and we couldn't get more specific, right? And just be a bit more actionable about what we're doing. I know there's a lot of customers doing some amazing things to try and bring more people into this great this great career that we have. But I feel like we're all doing it like one off, right? And so like, can we really align around something and say, hey, we're all going to go do this thing. We're all going to go either invest in this program, right? We're gonna do this at mass so that it's not like a little bit by bit, where we can make a bigger movement towards it. Um, and then I'm a technology guy, so that's my other one, right? Like I think, and it ties directly to the labor there's going to be a need of skills and also our ability to take advantage of the technology is going to be dependent on people and then data. And so the second one that I put in there is like we need to think about how do we optimize and change policy and really work around how do we better share data in our industry, because if we do that really really well, I think we can supercharge a lot of the things that we want to do. I think of like supply chain as like comes to mind for me, right? I worked in this industry for about 15, 16 years at contractors. It's a black box out there a lot of times of understanding like where materials are, what availability is. We're one of the few industries that that's the case, right? A lot of other places, a lot of other industries, like there's a ton more visibility in the supply chain of what's actually happening. And so I think that's going to require people kind of aligning around what to share and how to share it and some standards potentially. If we do that, we can leverage a lot of the technology that is coming to market today in a much, much bigger way than we have.
I think that the data sharing question is something we've been talking about for quite some time, and I think unanimously we all agree it should be happening. It's the actual execution of that, right? That can be the challenging. But I think you're right. I think what was really interesting about the point you made too, in terms of what sort of technological innovations can actually help support with the labor challenges, right?
Yeah.
And so they're sometimes I think we think of them separate issues,
Mhm.
but they actually can be quite linked in terms of efficiency. I think one of the things, and I don't know if you have any insight on this, but and it kind of struck me when you were talking about the contractual changes.
Mm.
Governments like fixed price. They like to know the cost of something. They like to know. I mean, I have worked on the political side of things
It's
to
the
say
age-old conundrum, right?
it
Yeah.
really is, right? And I think, to what degree do you think we can leverage lessons learned from COVID, for example, or
Mhm.
previous tariff regimes where, that to sort of adapt and evolve the situation we're in now? Are there, I mean, are there lots of things that kind of occurred that we saw in market that we could kind of point to and say, look, we were able to make that work. We could use that now. Because I think part of the challenge that a lot of folks will have on the public sector side will be convincing the politicians to enter into big contracts with the volatility that, that there is. And so, looking at those lessons learned from those other perspectives might be helpful.
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting about this debate that seems to go on forever is, the good thing about public projects is they're public, so there's a lot of available data on what happens on these projects, and I'm pretty sure the research has been done pretty much everywhere that it's not cheaper. It's not cheaper, right? You get a fixed price to start, but then we've put in place a contract that we, as contractors, we know how to play the game, right? We are playing by the rules that you have given us. You can't be mad when, now everything starts to cost more because of changes that are happening and delays and all these things. And what ends up happening is, well, that's the set of rules we chose to play this game by, right? And I think that's when we look back and we go, oh, let's compare projects that have been done in more of a collaborative manner, where we might have, a more guaranteed maximum price, a more P3 type of arrangement, more, IPD type of arrangement. They still come within the right range that you want. It's just more flexible as a framework for us to go work. And I think we're going to see the convergence of this in a couple different ways. One is COVID accelerated a lot of the needs for us to build certain things. And there was just no way for those projects to get done in a traditional like design, bid, build mentality. And so people kind of opened up and said, okay, well, we can do this as like a design build, or we can do this as like a collaborative agreement, right? We had a contractor that did like 53 school renovations during COVID that like never could have happened if it went down the tradition, like just the timeline wouldn't actually work, right? And we need to optimize for the system as a whole, right? So we've now seen that those things can work, and we need to like put those wins like and educate everyone that it's possible, because I think that's the other thing is people don't want to change from what they know, right? It's inherently as humans, we want to do the thing that we know. And what does government know when they know, design, bid, build, right? That's what we've done, and that's what we're comfortable with because we feel protected. But the reality of it is we have probably more and more great examples of where the outcome was even better when we took a more collaborative approach, and we need to put those things in front of policymakers and to make them understand that, and that's where it's going to take some advocacy from us.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think, we benefit from a really solid P3 market in Canada, more than 300 projects to point to sort of say, look, here's what we can do. I think it'll be interesting with the national narrative the way it is not just about building. It is about leveraging private capital and leveraging private sector expertise. It's also about leveraging AI and other things. So I think, we there is a huge opportunity right now for industry writ large, to get in there and talk about and influence decision makers now. So I think it's an exciting time. I think I had one question for you too, because I think the supply chain issues is interesting, and we've talked a lot about this. We know that the steel and aluminum tariffs, the impact on sort of the mechanical and electrical in particular, where things kind of go cross border maybe once or twice between the two, and looking for alternatives. Where and what does that, and we're talking a lot in Canada about sort of our our trade routes and what
Hmm.
infrastructure needs to be to expand capacity for trade in other places. But we have talked a lot, and we've been asked, by government officials as well too, a lot about sort of the Buy Canada sort of approach.
Hmm.
Um, but to develop that capacity can take time, and the
Yeah.
needs are great. So, what do we need to think about, or how do we convey to to decision makers that gap, right? Like, if you force it, because the fear might be from industry that we get sort of Buy Canada clauses in procurement documents that's going to force an issue. And if everybody does that, the one or two companies that may make those things, are they going to be able to ramp up? Are they
Yeah.
going to have the supply, and what's that going to do to the supply chain? So how do we balance that for decision makers in terms of the desire to build up our sovereignty, but also build today?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It has to be a balance, right? It's not going to be. I don't think there's an opportunity to just flip the switch overnight. However, I do think I think there's a huge opportunity, right? With every challenge, somebody is presented with an opportunity on the backside of that. And so, for these folks who are established, how do they start to think about how do they scale their business and invest ahead, right? Even if the Buy Canada doesn't come, I still think there's going to be a higher desire to work more local, right?
Hmm.
We've just experienced so many things as an industry that when things are further away from us and we have less visibility, we have less control. And so I think as our industry starts to shift our mindset around like low price, we have to do the same thing that we're asking government officials to do, right? Which is like, don't always go with the lowest number, right? Don't always just do design, bid, build, right? Like partner with them, right? And I think if you take that same approach to like manufacturing and materials and suppliers in the region, if there's a partnership that can be formed there where we're actually saying, hey, like we are committing to buy this much from you. We know that you're going to have to ramp up over time, but like how can we plan for that together? How do we have more visibility into the pipeline? Because I never have I met a businessman who owns a business or a businesswoman who doesn't want to grow the business, right? They all want to grow, but they also have to manage the risk that goes associated with it. So back to that same mentality, we have to share the risk. We need to invest a little bit ahead on probably building up manufacturing. We need to invest a little bit ahead on saying, hey, we're going to have this much to buy from you based on these projects. And we're seeing some very like, we see this in all across North America, Canada, and the US right now of people creating strategic alliances with their suppliers and negotiating prices that might be a little bit higher than we have right now or a little bit lower than we have right now, but they're getting that certainty. And that I think is the thing that because it all comes down to construction projects all come down to schedule, right? Delays will cost you a lot more than what you might pay a few more shekels here and there for a material. And so if you have that certainty and predictability and you have that flow, you'll make up the difference in the production.
Great. Looking at the time, Chris, I just want to say on behalf of the council, thank you so much to you and Procore for joining us today, and as well to all of our attendees for participating. And just a note for those in attendance, if the recording of this will be uploaded soon to our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in rewatching or sharing, the link, I think has just been added to the chat. Thank you, Smart. Just also a reminder for folks, our registration is now open for P3 2025, Canada's Infrastructure Conference. The council is hosting once again, I think we're in 33 or 34 years now, our must attend event. I will warn folks, it is earlier this year in October on the 27th and 28th rather than November, which I know folks are used to. But once again in downtown Toronto. And I think, we have a lot to talk about as an industry, and I think including much of what Chris talked about today. So it'll be a fantastic program that's shaping up. Some of the sessions have already been uploaded to the website if you're curious. Of course, we will have a big focus on the priorities of the new federal government, and how that's trickling down to the provinces, territories, and municipalities, and then how we as an industry can sort of build out and support the infrastructure needs across the country. So if anybody is interested in sponsoring, or you have any questions, ideas, or any speaker suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're always happy to hear from folks. And with that, once again, Chris, thank you, huge thank you for
Yeah,
this. As it's,
absolutely.
it's absolutely top of mind for all of us. It's going to be an interesting few months and years for us as we navigate all of this all at once. But really appreciate your insights and for joining us today.
All right. Thank you so much for
Great.
having me and look forward to connecting with more of you.